Good morning, it's Loren Lockman coming to you from the Tanglewood Wellness Center in Costa Rica. I've been asked this morning to talk a little bit about juicing. Is juicing okay? Is juicing as helpful as people say it is? I was reading somewhere this morning, someone was saying that because of the condition of our depleted soils and therefore the condition of our produce, we must juice in order to get what we need. And so that's one viewpoint, and it may seem reasonable to some people. Certainly there's no question that soils are depleted through conventional farming practices, and that if you're buying conventional produce, you are not getting much value for your dollar. But I hope you're not buying conventional produce, not if you care about your health. If you care about your health, you want to do better than that, and buy organic produce, or buy stuff that you're growing yourself, or you know somebody who is, whether it's certified or not. And that, if that's the case, then the nutrient content is much less of an issue. But that's really a separate discussion. Let's just talk about the benefits or perceived benefits of juicing, what's actually happening when we juice produce, and if you'd like we can talk about blending as well at the same time. But let's start by talking about juicing. First of all, when we juice something, we are creating an end product which is very concentrated. In fact, I would say overly concentrated. And I've probably shared this brief little story with you before, but it's the one about the woman I was talking to who came up to approach me and ask me some questions after a lecture. And I looked at her and said, "You drink a lot of carrot juice, don't you?" And she said, "Yeah." "How'd you know?" And I said, "Well, you're orange." Okay? Her skin was orange, like not quite as bright as these flowers, but it was a distinctive orange color. She told me that's because she was detoxifying, and that's when I pointed out that none of the many people I've taken through this incredibly powerful detoxification process have ever turned orange. So what was going on there wasn't detoxification of what was in her body, it was the fact that her body was actually forced to push these carotenes through her skin because her liver was probably incapable of doing the job. When we are juicing, we're creating overly concentrated substances. Now, there's a belief in our culture that many people fall prey to. And that belief is that if something is good for us, more must be better, right? Let's get as much as we can. That seems to be the idea of nutrition often. Let's consume these things so we get as much of this and as much of that as possible. But consider for a second, well, we've talked about the analogy of the plant, right? Does the plant benefit from getting more water? No. How about more sunlight? No. The plant benefits from getting exactly what it needs in exactly the right concentrations. And we're no different. When we consume more carotenes than the body was designed to take in, and how was the body designed to take in carotenes? Through whole foods, through quantities of food that we would actually sit down and eat. So for instance, we would eat carrots. Everyone here eaten carrots at some point? How many? How many large carrots at one time? One, maybe two. How many in a big glass of carrot juice? A lot more than that. 4, 5, 6, 8. No one would eat that many. Okay? We're actually, when we're juicing, we're taking in concentrations of nutrients that our bodies were never intended to deal with. And all we're doing is creating more work. Now, what if someone has a deficiency? Well, if someone has a deficiency, they might be well served to deal with the underlying cause of the problem. Either the diet is insufficient, they're not getting what they need from the food they're actually eating, or the body is incapable of effectively digesting, absorbing, and assimilating what's in the food. And it can only be one of those two things. So drinking a glass of juice, is that not dealing with the cause of the problem? No, not at all. It's not correcting the diet, and it's not fixing the body. It's a Band-Aid approach, okay? And every Band-Aid approach has issues. One of the issues that's critically important to understand is something that comes up as a result of a law of nature called the law of efficiency. Now, we've talked about the law of efficiency here quite a few times. You guys remember what it means? No? Well, how about every organism is always attempting to get the most benefit for the least amount of effort. Now, it shows up in lots of different ways, but one of the ways it shows up is that when we give the body a crutch of any kind, the body becomes dependent on the crutch. So if we are using overly concentrated, unnaturally concentrated substances like juices, we're actually making the body dependent on them. We might well temporarily eliminate a carotene deficiency if we had one, or a vitamin A deficiency if we had one, but it's only going to be there true as long as we continue to consume carrot juice every single day, because we become dependent on it. Okay? It's much more efficient for the body to get what it needs from this very concentrated source than it is to have to get it from its food. And so it becomes less able to get it from food. Does this make sense to everyone? Okay, so overly concentrated substances aren't beneficial to us. You know, there's another interesting piece that comes up. I've talked quite a bit about the benefits of consuming fewer calories. And there are actually studies that talk about the benefits of calorie restriction. Well, in 2013, there was a study published that said if you simply reduce the amount of protein you're consuming, you get much, not all, but many of the benefits of caloric restriction can be had by simply restricting protein intake. Excess protein is harmful to us. It actually dramatically increases risks of disease. Okay? Well, in discussing this study, on nutritionfacts.org, it was pointed out that the only way you could ever get too much protein as a vegan or vegetarian was if you were eating like 3 heads of lettuce at a time. Who would ever eat that many? Nobody. But how many people would juice that many at one time? A whole bunch. A lot of people drinking green juices are consuming 3 or more heads of lettuce every single day, lettuce or some other green. And that's a problem because greens are about 50% protein. So if we're consuming excessive quantities of food, of real food, we're taking in excessive quantities of protein that are actually going to harm us, just as if we were eating animal products, which our bodies are not set up for. Okay? So, you know, it's erroneous to think that it's only animal proteins that are harmful to us. It's excessive protein from any source is a problem. And it would be hard to get too much protein as long as we were simply eating food. But as soon as we begin creating unnatural substances like juices, which are overly concentrated, now we're creating issues that didn't exist before. Okay? Some of you might be aware that kale, collard greens, all members of the brassica family, cruciferous vegetables, are goitrogens. They contain goitrogens. What are these? Well, these are substances that tend to create goiter, which is swelling the thyroid gland. Okay, they're creating a problem for your thyroid. Well, you guys have heard me say over and over again, we would never want to eat any leafy green that you could make a pair of shoes out of. You know, these heavy, dense leafy greens. People think, yeah, but I'll juice them. It's no different. If you're juicing, you're consuming even greater quantities of these things, you're much more likely to damage your thyroid. So, you know, people think green juice is the best thing in the world. Why do you think people think that? What is it that's giving people this idea that they're getting so much benefit from green juices?
Because they don't eat enough greens to begin with?
Well, how about because they feel better when they drink them? Now that seems reasonable enough, doesn't it? But let me point something out to you, okay? While I'm here, which is the vast majority of the time I live here, so I spend most of my time here. I spend some time every year traveling and speaking, maybe 2 months or perhaps 3 months total. But in the 9 or 10 months a year that I'm here, I eat watermelon almost every day. I love watermelon, and my body is always wanting it. So usually at least once a day, probably minimum 4 or 5 times a week, I eat watermelon. Now, on the last 2 trips, each time I was out of the country for about 5 weeks or more, I never ate watermelon one time. I never did. Why not? Well, it was available to me. However, what was also available were things I don't have access to here, like fresh figs and peaches and nectarines and Bing cherries and durian. So I was consuming things that I can't get while I'm here in Costa Rica, and I was happy to do that. But here's the crazy part. I felt amazingly good every single day, even though I wasn't consuming watermelon. But people tell me all the time, if I don't drink my green juice, I don't feel very good. Have you ever heard that or experienced that? Well, you want to understand that a real food, a healthy food for your body, never creates that reaction. Never. There's nothing you have to consume every single day in order to feel good. No food that you have to consume every day to feel good. If you're not consuming something one day and you don't feel good, there's a problem. I mean, what else does that to you? Coffee? How do people who have a coffee habit feel when they skip their coffee? Not very good. They're dragging, aren't they? Because they're not getting their stimulant. Anything that makes you feel not very good, if you stop consuming it and you instantly don't feel very good the next day, it was stimulating you in some way. Now, why would juices stimulate you? Well, they're overly concentrated. They're unnatural concentrations. And if they are made from fruit or carrots or beets, what are they going to contain a lot of? Sugar. Sugar is a stimulant. Now, does anybody get stimulated from eating fruit? I don't. I eat fruit most of the time and have for 23 years. But the difference is that when I eat fruit, the fiber is fully intact. And that fiber slows down the absorption of sugar into my bloodstream. When I juice an orange or a pineapple or whatever it might be, I'm creating an unnatural product which has more than 3 times, or roughly 3 times, the glycemic load of the original substance. That means my body's going to have to work much harder to deal with the sugar. It's going to act as a stimulant because it's much more concentrated sugar. You guys see what I'm talking about? Well, that's why we drink green juices, right? Well, green juices are 50% protein. With no fiber, what happens? Same thing. Excess protein acts as a stimulant in your body. Why would that be true? Well, I've already pointed out to you just a moment ago, excess protein causes disease. It shortens your telomeres, which means you age faster, and it increases your risk of disease. So what does your body want to do with excess protein? Get rid of it. How does it do that? It speeds up your system. You feel energized because your body has sped up your metabolism to try to get rid of this stuff. So anything you consume that gives you that feeling of a boost is harmful to you. If you want more energy, get more sleep. Make sure you're eating correctly. Make sure you're getting enough sunlight. Make sure you're dealing with your emotions. Meet all of your body's needs as well as you can, and you will eventually, not necessarily in 10 minutes, you'll eventually have more energy. Anything that gives you an immediate boost or that leaves you feeling tired or depressed if you don't consume it was stimulating you and is therefore harmful, because all stimulants leave you weaker and more tired after the body has processed them. Does everyone see this? Okay? So these are all issues you want to be really clear about. What else is problematic about drinking juices? Well, juices are largely oxidized. Now, oxygen, I mean, how can that be a problem? We need oxygen. Oxygen can't be bad for us. Well, it turns out that oxygen is actually the most corrosive element on the planet. It actually corrodes things more rapidly than anything else. In fact, oxygen is so powerful, it can completely destroy iron. Now, iron's pretty strong, isn't it? But have you ever heard of rust? Rust is oxidation. This is what happens when oxygen affects iron. So iron is usually painted or treated in some way. Right? Stainless steel is manufactured to take iron and create something that won't rust. That's what it's for. Okay? So oxygen doesn't affect it. Oxygen affects lots of things. And when we juice something, we are oxidizing many of the nutrients. Now, I wish I could tell you what percentage of your nutrients on average will be oxidized, but I have not been able to find a study that's actually looked at this in a real way. There is someone out there, a well-known man, I won't mention names, who's claimed in the past that 85% of the nutrients are destroyed by oxidation when you juice. My guess is that's probably bogus. It's probably not that high. But it could be pretty high in some cases. Now, I did find one study, and this study looked at a tomato pressing operation. What do I mean by pressing? Well, a hydraulic press where they're taking tomatoes and making tomato paste or tomato sauce. So pounds and pounds of tomatoes get put into a cylinder where a hydraulic press comes down. In the absence of oxygen, because the thing is full, 40% of the vitamin C is lost from those tomatoes in 3 minutes. I was reading somewhere on someone's blog the other day, they said, if you're using a press to make your juices, you can stick them in the fridge for up to 72 hours, 3 days, and they'll be okay. I don't think so. In a pressing operation of tomatoes, 40% of the vitamin C was lost in 3 minutes. Not 3 days, 3 minutes. Now think about a typical juicer, where air is being drawn into the machine. Not true in a press, but in a typical juicer or a blender, you're going to have dramatically greater rates of oxidation. This is problematic enough, it would be problematic enough if it was destroying, let's say, 40% of all the nutrients. That would be a big enough problem because we'd be getting much less value. I mean, do you really want to spend all that money for all that produce you're juicing, 3 or 4 times as much as you'd eat, to have much of the nutritional value destroyed by oxidation? Probably not. But it's actually a much bigger problem than that. And the reason it is because oxidation does not affect all nutrients at the same rate. It affects some much more than others. So when we have a whole food, an orange, an apple, a pineapple, a watermelon, whatever it is, what we have is a synergistic combination of nutrients that all work together to create the best thing possible for our bodies. In fact, it's interesting, if you look at virtually any study on an individual nutrient, the conclusion almost always says something like, and the best way to get this nutrient is by eating the whole foods that contain it, not by eating isolated nutrients. And I would suggest that when we're juicing something, although we don't have isolated nutrients, what we have is an unnatural product because we've destroyed some of the nutrients to a much greater degree than some of the other ones. Vitamin C, for instance, is very, very volatile. So we destroy most of vitamin C when we juice anything very quickly. We may be destroying close to 100% of the vitamin C by juicing citrus in a machine while we're leaving some of the other nutrients. We've created an issue because now we have something that is not only super concentrated, but it's highly imbalanced. It's no longer the perfect balance of nutrition that we get from whole food. Let me just remind you guys of something. Can we agree for a second that an apple or an orange or a banana or a watermelon or a peach or a plum or a strawberry, that these are all perfect foods for our bodies? Can we all agree on that?
Yes.
Well, let me ask you, how do we improve on perfection? By definition, you can't do it. You can't get better than perfect. What that means is that anytime we process these things in any way, what we wind up with is less than it was before. It's never more than. It's amazing to me how people think we're going to take this produce and we're going to make it better for us, more nutritious somehow, by juicing it. That doesn't make any sense. Like every other species on the planet, we've been given everything we need in nature. We're never going to improve on that. When we juice something, when we blend something, we process something in any way. And processing means it's no longer whole. Okay, so putting it through a blender or a juicer, those are processes. They're processed foods that we have afterward. And they're called processed foods to distinguish them from whole foods because they are no longer, by definition, whole. One of the ways that they're not whole that people often don't think about is when we juice something, what are we doing with the fiber? We're throwing it away. Well, so what? It's just fiber, right? The fiber that comes out, that we throw away from the juicer, is largely what? indigestible. It's largely fiber we can't digest anyway. Do we need it? Well, before we talk about whether we should be eating the fiber or not, let's just point out, let me remind you guys of something I've shared with you here before, for you guys with me. The experts estimate that they've identified between 5 and 10% of the nutrients in our plant foods. Now, for years, I've been asking the same question, and that question is, how do we know that some of the 90 to 95% of the stuff that hasn't been identified yet, those beneficial nutrients that haven't been identified, how do we know some of that stuff's not bound up in the fiber? Well, guess what? Just a couple years ago, scientists showed that, in fact, nutrients, vital nutrients, were bound up in the fiber. So we throw the fiber away, once again, we're getting something that's no longer complete. It's fragmented. It's not a whole food. It's imbalanced because we're throwing away part of the whole package. So how can we ensure we're getting everything in that food that's good for us? Eat the whole food. Well, how about those things that aren't edible? I mean, people drink wheatgrass juice because we can't eat wheatgrass. We're not cows, sheep, or goats. It's not digestible for us. Right. What that points out to me is if we can't eat the food, we don't need the food. Now, I know wheatgrass juice contains tons of nutrients, but remember, tons of nutrients, getting more nutrition into the body, is not the goal. The goal is to make the body efficient and effective at using the whole foods that are coming in. We're never going to improve on that. Wheatgrass juice is a powerful stimulant because it's mostly protein. We've talked about that, okay? We're never going to improve on whole foods. Like every other species, we do not need processed foods of any kind. We don't need supplements of any kind. If it appears that we do, that is to say, if a deficiency condition exists or seems to, remember there's only two potential causes. Either the diet's not sufficient or the body's not working properly. Let's deal with those two causes. Let's fix the diet, or let's allow the body the opportunity to do what you guys are doing for 26 to 42 days, which is cleansing and healing itself so that you will get everything you need. We've talked about this before. Some of you may be experiencing this right now, but we frequently see people here fasting who eliminate their deficiency conditions while they're consuming nothing but water, pure water. How's that possible? Well, it occurs to me the only way it's possible is if the nutrients were already in the body but not being used. Remember, there's no evidence that consuming more of this stuff is the issue, that we're not getting enough of it. Is osteoporosis an issue in our culture, especially for women over the age of 60? Absolutely. But it's not because they're not consuming enough calcium. Remember, in Asia and Africa, people consume on average roughly 18% as much calcium and don't have osteoporosis. B12 deficiencies are rampant, even among people consuming animal products, where they're consuming tons of vitamin B12 because animal products are loaded with it. They still have B12 deficiency problems. The problem isn't that we need to consume more of the stuff. The problem is that we need to make our bodies better capable of dealing with the stuff they already have. Does this make sense to you guys? Mm-hmm. Juicing is not fixing the problem. It is simply creating a larger problem by giving the body an unnatural, highly concentrated, largely oxidized, imbalanced, fragmented substance where we don't have the synergistic benefits of the whole foods. The bottom line is that juices are unnatural to our bodies, and there's nothing that is unnatural to our bodies that we need to have to be healthy. And I would suggest even further, there's nothing that's unnatural to our bodies that we can consume that's not going to have a deleterious effect on our health. These things are harmful to us because our bodies were not set up for them. They're not designed for them. Now, there's a couple more issues that people often point to. Juices are more digestible. They're easily digested by the body. Is this true? Well, remember that when we digest a food, our bodies are breaking down that food into individual cells so we can use those individual cells, those components. Does a juicer or a blender break something down to its cellular level? Absolutely not. You know, it's one thing to talk about juices. These are liquids. But let's talk about blended foods for just a second, because really this applies to both. We put something through a blender, and what are we doing to it? Well, we're oxidizing it, we're largely concentrating it, just as we do with juices, because we're probably consuming more than we would if it was a whole food. But we're also changing the structure of it. We're oxidizing it, but we're also changing the structure where it's completely broken down. So we eat an apple, we chew it up, because we don't want to choke. We can't swallow big pieces of apple whole. But who chews applesauce? Nobody. I mean, maybe the same people that are out there chewing their juices and smoothies. But most of us feel kind of stupid trying to chew a liquid. Okay? You put something that's liquid or semi-liquid into your mouth, the tendency is to swallow it. But when we do that, we're ensuring that we're not beginning the process of digestion in the mouth as we're intended to. We're also ensuring that the body is not taking the full measure of that substance on the tongue because it's not spending much time in the mouth. We swallow it, and that means that when it gets to the digestive tract is not properly prepared for it. When we eat whole food and we chew it up thoroughly the way we're intended to, the body has a chance to actually see exactly what that food is comprised of, so that your digestive tract is ready to properly and completely digest it so that it can absorb it and assimilate it. When we juice or blend it, we're ensuring that doesn't happen. Now, if this is true, how come this isn't obvious to people? Well, it's not obvious because the foods are coming out in the same form they went in. You can't, if you eat a big piece of kale and don't chew it up, you know it doesn't get digested. How? Because you see it again. But if you put it through your blender, you're not going to recognize it when it comes back out. It's going to look like poop. So you don't recognize that it wasn't digested. But that's what happens. Imagine you eat a kernel of corn and don't chew it up, it comes right back out of your body. Well, how about if you put a whole bunch of kernels of corn in the blender and blended them up and then swallowed them? You might not recognize the corn if it was completely blended. But it wouldn't be better digested than that kernel of corn is. Because blending it is not digesting it. It's manipulating, it's mechanically breaking it down, but digestion is much more than simply mechanically breaking it down. We do chew our food to mechanically break it down, but we're chewing it with digestive juices and giving the body a chance to properly ensure that the stomach and intestines are ready for that specific food. When we swallow it whole the way we tend to do with juices and smoothies, that almost certainly does not happen. So one more piece, some of you have heard, if you want to be a raw vegan, you have to invest a lot of money in equipment. I've been a raw vegan for 23 years, and I don't own any equipment. I mean, I have a knife and a cutting board and a plate and a bowl, okay? But Rita, is there a juicer in that kitchen? How about a blender? How about a food processor?
Nothing.
Nothing, okay? There's also no oven or stove, by the way. Those things are completely unnecessary. We don't need any of those machines. Now, you can have them, and you can occasionally consume something that's been processed this way if you choose to. You just want to understand that every time you do that, you're making a compromise. The very best we can do is to eat whole foods. And if we're not getting the results that we want eating whole foods, then what we want to do is take a step back and ask an intelligent question. Like, what's the problem here? Is it my diet? Am I consuming food that doesn't contain nutrients? Am I not consuming the right mixture of foods? Am I consuming stuff that doesn't belong in my body that I can't digest? Or if the diet is optimized and I'm still not getting what I need, then the only other place to look is how well is my system functioning? I deal with people all the time who have digestive problems. How many of you here right now showed up with digestive disorder? At least as part of your complaint. Well, that's most of you in the room, okay? So there's 10 or 11 people here. Most of you just raised your hand. So it's a common thing. And yet when people are finished here, when they've given their body a chance to truly cleanse and heal, and they eat properly, virtually nobody has digestive complaints. I myself know about this firsthand after 3 years of suffering from irritable bowel syndrome, where I had a lot of trouble processing anything through my system. The doctors told me just watch what you eat, and that worked really well unless I ate food, because any food created a problem for me. I hope this has been beneficial to you guys. I hope it's been beneficial to you too. I'll see you next time. Remember, we can't improve on whole foods. Let's just take nature's beautiful gifts to us and eat them in as whole a way as we can for the wind. All right? See you next time.